Okay, well, welcome one and all. We continue to make our way through the book of Ruth. Next week we'll finish up. So, in fact, this lesson's a little shorter than it should be, but it's too long to go through the entire book today, finish up. So, we're having two kind of shorter lessons that are doable rather than one giant long lesson, which is not doable. Okay? So, just think about what you would like to study, topic or book or whatnot. Okay? And so we're going to. So last week, do we remember what kind of happened with Boaz and Ruth? And Boaz kind of made a declaration, a statement, or at least of intent. And what was that, if you remember? Well, obviously, he's aware of Ruth's and Naomi's kind of poverty and plight, and he's making sure that they don't remain poor, right? Because he's allowed her to not really glean, but just follow the harvesters directly, and he told them to kind of leave behind extra stocks of grain. So Naomi and Ruth are doing well, okay? So she collects enough grain for them to eat, but also enough to take to market to sell for money, which then allows, the household to have extra stuff and not, live in privation. And well, he's related to Ruth, and Naomi kind of sent Ruth, okay, well, back where you crush the grain and remove all the chaff and stuff, go there. And so she kind of did as Naomi said, but both Boaz and Ruth were most honorable, even though she kind of sidled up to him during the night, and in the morning he sent her away privately, and he said, I will be your redeemer. Okay? The thing is, of course, that's his intention, but everything is not as simple as it may seem. And that's where we find ourselves in chapter 4. Okay? So let's turn to Ruth chapter 4. Okay? Well, wait a minute. That's where we want to be, but in the lesson I take a diversion because it's not going to make a whole lot of sense when we read what's happening if we don't understand some of the Old Testament law. Okay, so let's turn to page 1 on the bulletin. The lesson, and let's look at that part from Deuteronomy 25, and this is going to tell us kind of how this whole kinsman redeemer thing works. Okay, because we don't have this in our culture. We have no clue, right? So Deuteronomy 25, verses 7 through 10. If a man does not want to marry his brother's widow, so he's supposed to ensure she's taken care of, to ensure property rights pass on, so on and so forth, right? But, okay, people don't always want to do this, right? So if a man does not want to marry his brother's widow, she is to go to the elders at the town gate and declare, my brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. See, so how this worked is that property passed on, from father to son. Okay, and so if you don't have a son, what's going to happen to the property that you would have passed on, right? So the kinsman redeemer, any child born from the widow, is considered the son of the first husband who passed away. And that ensures property rights. So that way, it ensures that, but also ensures that what? It's the social security of the day, right? Because men earned the income, women didn't. And so this prevented homelessness and women living in poverty. If women lived in poverty, it would be because the man was poor. Okay? So that's how it's supposed to work. But of course, people can be greedy and say, well, I don't want more people to feed, or whatever it may be. See? So my brother-in-law refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel. He is unwilling to fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law for me. The elders of his city will summon him and speak to him. If he refuses to budge, insisting, I don't want to marry her, his brother's widow will go up to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face. So in other words, you're a total scum, And if this is a public act of showing that he's shirking his duties, he's not fulfilling what he's supposed to do because he's a cheapskate. Okay? This is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. His family name will be referred to in Israel as the house of the man whose sandal was removed. Okay? So this is kind of social pressure. This shouldn't even need to be done, right? But, oh man, my brother's wife, oh man, she's a mean woman. There's no way, right? Who knows? Who knows whatever the reason could be, okay? So that kind of lets us know that there is an out, but still it doesn't resolve the problem, right? It shames the person who's supposed to take care of her, which means what? Somebody else now has that responsibility because there's no governmental safety net. Didn't exist, right? If you expected the government to feed you back then, you would have died waiting. So, okay. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. Okay. Now what's the deal with the gate? Well, a lot of stuff takes place there, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. So it's not like he's being lazy. This is a place where actual business is conducted, kingly duties, etc. Okay. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." So it's kind of like, even turn aside is kind of behold, friend. So we're supposed to notice something. So that's the Hebrew word hene, right? And so it could be to catch your attention. When God speaks and somebody responds, often it's hene, here I am. So it's an interjection that serves a whole lot of different purposes. And so here, it's kind of telling us, it's kind of like alerting us, hey, we need to, as listeners, we need to behold. Something important is going to happen here. So it's slick how the text does this for us, okay? Friend is kind of, that's being generous. It's really kind of like a someone, a certain someone, or such and so, or something along those lines. It's kind of a nondescript reference to a person, okay? And there's a reason for this. In fact, the text, in a sense, is kind of going out of its way never to refer to this person by name, okay? Well, we'll find out why as we continue to read through the book of Ruth, okay? But friend is really too nice. It's, I don't know what Boaz may have actually said, but the text says, a certain someone, okay? And this is actually part of the text describing not Boaz speaking, okay? So turn aside, friend. But anyways, so he's saying a certain someone, and then sit down, etc., etc., okay? So we're now kind of set with the behold, and then the friend is just nondescript, okay? Let's take a look at the gate. The gate has significance in Israel and perhaps some other kingdoms of old as well. Okay? So the city gate was an essential part of Israelite life. It served as an entrance in and out of the city walls, which provided protection from enemies and securities from its citizens. That's true for all of the old gated cities, right? The city gate was also a center of commerce, the seat of the city's judges and elders, where the laws were passed and decisions made. So a person can petition the king, but that's really a huge deal to make, into the king's residence. So often the king or a representative would be at the gate who would then do the king's business, and people would come and petition. And so a person could petition the king's representative, and then what the person says is the equivalent of the king making a decree on how to solve issues. And if you remember the King David and Absalom, so Absalom, what he did is he went to the city gate, and then he would say a whole bunch of bad stuff about his dad, and he did this for a couple years. And David is either oblivious or didn't know, or, oh, he's my son, he wouldn't do that. But he did it for long enough where a significant portion of the population began to turn against King David. Oh, well, my dad, la la la, but when I'm king, this is what I'm going to do. So, he was kind of dirtying the water. And so he kind of took a particular practice and turned it in a bad way to his advantage. Well, Absalom ended up being killed, because of his rebellion, but yeah. Okay. King David had a seat at the gate Jerusalem. So the king got up and took his place at the city gate. When all the people were told that the king was sitting at the city gate, they all came before him. Well, yeah, Absalom too. Okay. So Boaz is going to the city gate to do official business. Well, what official business would this be? We know the context of the story of Ruth, right? Well, and he meets somebody. He meets a certain someone. So he's going there to kind of do this kinsman redeemer business, all right? Except we need to understand how everything works. Who owns what property? How is it passed on? Because we're going to find out something really sneaky about this guy who's supposed to be the kinsman redeemer, because he's closer in line. And so he has the duty to marry Ruth and take care of Naomi. Okay? But let's first understand property rights, and that's on page 2. Because Ruth and Naomi's situation is weird. And if we're listening for the very first time, and we know that they were in Moab, and and Naomi's husband and 2 sons died, and so we would have thought, oh well, I guess the property was sold or something, sold at a loss, at a time of famine, and that makes the best sense. And so that's what everyone would just think had happened. You don't really have to say that. It didn't have to happen, but most likely that's would have what had happened. So we would think, oh, so the kinsman redeemer now needs to what? Is he going to buy the land from the person it was sold to maintain? It gets complicated, but we'll find out that's not necessarily the case. So here we go. In Israel, the inheritance property passed from father to son. Doesn't matter whether you like it, that's how it was. So how could Naomi sell the land since she is Elimelech's son, but his widow? And that's what she'll end up doing. The question is, why? Okay. And so after we go over this whole area about property rights, we'll see that happen in the text. Unlike what seemed probable so far in Ruth, Elimelech did not lose his land when he and Naomi traveled to Moab, or sell it at a loss or a cut price. To the original listeners, we're assuming we're the original listeners, this is an unexpected, surprising development. They didn't sell how did that happen? Right? The story of Ruth never said he lost his property, but based on circumstances, the average person would assume as much, and the average person would not be crazy for thinking so. The story now becomes more involved, making us unsure of what may happen next. Because Elimelech can't sell his land, he's dead. His sons can't sell the land, he's dead. So from whom will the Redeemer buy the property? Right? When Elimelech died, the inheritance passed to his sons. However, they also died without having any heirs. Now we must enter the exceptions within Israelite law. And this is from Numbers 27. When a man dies without having a son, you must transfer his inheritance to his daughter. Ah, okay. So if there are no sons or the sons die, it goes to the daughter. So it still stays within the family. Okay? But Elimelech had no daughters. Oh, now what do we do? He does, however, have 2 daughters-in-law. Yay! Not all is lost. So the property would transfer to them, except they are Moabites. Oh yeah, they're aliens and outsiders. They don't have property rights in Israel. Okay? Of which only one was living in Israel. Ruth could not receive the property as a daughter because she was an outsider, a Moabite. So if she were Jewish, born Jewish, she would have the property. Okay? You think, why didn't just Naomi have it? Because she's the widow. Well, this is the law. Okay? Well, because it can't go to Ruth, now it goes back to Naomi. So normally it would go to either the son or daughter. Okay? Not being the case, even daughter-in-law, but none of this is a possibility now, so it goes back to Naomi, the widow. However, Naomi did not own the land, but held it in trust until it could be redeemed. So it still has to be purchased by a redeemer. She's holding it in trust. See? You go, wow, why didn't she just own it? Okay? The redeemer would restore the inheritance by representing the male heir. See, so the redeemer stands in the place of the person who would be the heir. Okay? And legally becomes that. Okay? So he becomes the male heir who would technically still own the property, but of course that doesn't happen because Elimelech's sons had died. So this points us forward to Christ in a weird way. Being baptized into him, we become sons of God, inheritors of what God has for us. Okay? So the property did go back to Naomi, but now what happens? The Redeemer has to buy the land from Naomi to fulfill his obligation under the law. The Redeemer must purchase the land. But because of all the weird things that happened, it went to the widow, but he still has to purchase the land. Okay? Wow. Okay? Naomi's ownership of the land was an exception to the norm made necessary by events which his redemption would restore. So by doing that, it's as if all the land passed on like it should have to whomever would have inherited the land. But of course, this is done through legal legal maneuvering and whatnot. Okay? So in Naomi's case, the Redeemer would buy the property she owned to make the redemption legitimate. Okay? The Redeemer's role also included bringing Naomi into his household to provide and care for her. Oh, so I'll just buy the land from Naomi, but not really give it to her because it's going to be in the household, right? And that's not how it worked. Okay? So the Redeemer will come and Naomi will live in his household either as considered as a wife or a mother. Well, it'll be a mother in this case, right? Because she's the widow and she has a daughter or daughter-in-law. Okay? After buying the land, the Redeemer could not take the money back any more so than if he had bought the property from someone else. So you have to buy the property for real to make this entire Redeemer thing legitimate. And it happens to be that you have to buy it from the widow. And you can't say, oh, well, we're going to be living in the same household, so no. You have to pay her for the land as if you bought it from someone else, and you can't ask for the money back. Okay? So, this means Naomi's future will be one where she will have much wealth, because she'll have all the holdings of the land, the value of the land, but who's going to farm it? The Redeemer. Who's going to take care of her? The Redeemer. So, if he's a good dude, you have the best of both worlds. You're going to have a lot of money, and yet you don't have any of the upkeep of the land. That's all his responsibility. His responsibility is farming, and his responsibility is taking care of her as if she were his own mother. This is really weird. Normally this wouldn't happen, but in these sets of circumstances, that's kind of how the law worked. And so when we understand this, when we make our way through Ruth, we're going to find out more about the guy who's supposed to be the Redeemer and how he acted and how he didn't act and what all of this reveals. Okay? So, verses 2 through 4. Okay? Okay. And he, that is what? Boaz, took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So he wants witnesses. He wants to do the kinsman redeemer thing, and he wants witnesses at the city gate. So everything is official. Nothing is done in secret. And whatever happens there happens. Sit down here. So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer. See, who's the Redeemer? That's a certain someone. See, this certain someone is closer is more closely related, and he has the primary responsibility of serving as kinsman redeemer, not Boaz. Okay? So Boaz, in a sense, is calling him out on the carpet to say, look, dude, you need to do your duty. Okay? And it seems as if he hasn't been doing anything because Boaz has been taking care of Naomi and Ruth. Now, the text of Ruth, he could have, and the text of Ruth may have just not told us any of this. But that doesn't seem likely. Okay? So it would be, in a sense, a sin of omission, which in this case doesn't seem to be happening. Okay? So then he said to the Redeemer, that certain someone, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Why? Because she's the only person who can do so. Remember, she doesn't technically own it. She's holding it in stewardship or holding it until the real Redeemer could purchase it. Okay? So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one else besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. Okay, so what's going on? So that guy's supposed to do it, but if he doesn't do it, Boaz is next in line, and then Boaz is responsible. So let's say this certain someone had died. Then Boaz would be the primary person who's supposed to do this. But this person hadn't died, and he's saying, hey, Naomi's selling the property, etc., 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 and if you're the kinsman redeemer, buy it. That's your responsibility. Okay. So who is not mentioned in this entire procedure so far? Okay, Boaz mentions Naomi to this certain someone. Whom does he not mention? He doesn't mention Ruth, right? So right now, it seems as if, the guy has to buy the property from the widow. Oh, that's going to be a lot of money, and she gets to keep the money. But if there are no heirs, and if there were, none of this stuff would be happening, right? So he's thinking, well, there are no heirs, so if he buys the land from her, it will become his land. Because they're not going to be any, because he's not taking in someone who will be his wife, who will bear sons or a daughter who can inherit the land. See what's going on? So, okay, I don't want to be like the shoeless dude at the gate and be shamed the rest of my life. But I can buy the land and it could become my own and I could pass it on to my sons. And so in a sense, however much land Boaz had, it might be doubling of property. Okay, so, the possibility of what might happen sounds pretty sweet. Okay, so we haven't quite finished all the way through verse 4. Let's read the very last part of it. And he said, this certain someone, I will redeem it. Meaning what? I will purchase the land, I will take Naomi into my household and treat her as if she were my mother. Okay? So he's doing what he's supposed to do. This guy is a good Jew. Yay! And there was rejoicing in the land. Okay? At least so it's supposed to be. Okay. Well, let's read the next verse. Because is everything like it's supposed to be? Will there be rejoicing in the land? Let's look at verse 5. Then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. He just drops the bomb. But you also have to take care of Elimelech, the widow of the son. Oh, right? And property rights will pass on, to the children she has. So right now, if I only take in the mother-in-law, it's one extra mouth to feed, but I'll end up having a lot more property, etc., etc. But now, you mean I have to take another person into my household, and then the land that I purchased won't end up being my own? Because, right, any children that Ruth bears can be legal inheritors, even if it's only a daughter, because a daughter can't inherit if there are no sons. Okay? Like, oh. So if he had ulterior motives, those are all dashed, right? It's like, oh, well, the plans that I had to do this now won't happen. And all I'm going to do is have a lot more, I'm going to have a lot of expense, but no long-term reward in the sense of having extra land that will become mine. Okay? On page 3, that's a bit of a chiasm. We'll kind of bring that out. Okay? This is a little something that the story is just kind of letting us know on that Ruth is technically a Moabite, but the writer of the text does not view her as such. So Ruth is a Moabite. What the story aspect within Ruth has Boaz telling the Redeemer that he will buy the land from Naomi and Ruth. He is saying that Ruth is a true Israelite despite her status as a Moabite. Okay? So, possible outcome. Financially, both Ruth and Naomi will receive money from the redemption of the land. Theologically, being a true Israelite does not depend on bloodlines, but by faith in the Messiah and being brought into his covenant. So the day you, A, and then of course A prime, you will buy, and then B from Naomi, and B prime from Ruth. So this is a slick little thing, just to kind of let us know through this rhetorical kind of vehicle what's happening. So it's not only the plans of that, but Ruth is included and will benefit from the sale of land, who happens to be a Moabite. Okay? So if he says, Moabite, what? It's bad enough that Naomi lived in Moab. So there could be some of that going on. We don't know. But traditionally, Moabites and Israelites weren't too friendly toward each other. Okay? So what's going to happen? So Boaz, he didn't say this right up front. He said it after. So we'll see. Let's look at verse 6. Okay? Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. What? What does him purchasing land have anything to do with his inheritance? Has nothing to do with it. You inherit something because you're born into a particular family and you receive it. So, in other words, the guy panicked and just pulled something out of his rear end. This makes no sense because he can't impair his own inheritance. Okay? Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. He could before. Now he's like, oh. See? So, what does this tell us about this certain someone? Yeah. He was only in it because he thought he was going, oh, I'm going to buy the land, but I don't have, I don't have to, it's not going to pass on to, who, I don't remember who Ruth's husband was, but it was either Mahlon or Kilion, who would have, none of that happens, and he thought he was going to keep it all for himself. He's like, yay! Now he realizes, oh, that's not the case. This really just becomes purely doing my duty. Oh, I don't want to do that. You do that, Boaz. And then he comes up with some ridiculous reason as to why he can't. Okay? On the bottom of page 3, what we find out about this certain someone. Now you know why he's not named. Right? I mean, his actions show, wow. Right? Despicable dude. A certain someone has enough money to redeem the land. He said he was going to in verse 5. That, however, comes with the obligation to care for Naomi as wife or mother. Naomi is older, past childbearing years, so the Redeemer would have provided for Naomi as a mother. He is unaware of any daughters. If there were any sons, this transaction would not be taking place. Or technically a daughter. If there were any heirs. Okay? So he thinks he will get to keep the land since, no widow exists who can bear sons to inherit the land. Ruth, however, right? Now he finds out about Ruth dashing his hopes of gaining land in his role of redeemer. So for him, this was all a possible This was all a chance to increase his land holdings. Okay? And there wasn't as if there was a whole lot of free land in Israel. So he saw this as an opportunity. But the whole point is that he didn't want to do this if it came to only helping his family. See, he wanted the pot sweetened a bit more. Okay? What this verse should cause within the original hearer. So let's pretend we're the original hearers here. Okay? This story has us fully invested in Boaz and Ruth. Though we want Boaz to be the redeemer, a certain someone's reason for reneging on his obligation doesn't match what he earlier said. He could afford to buy the land, which wouldn't impair his own inheritance. Okay? A certain someone is now lying. He just kind of did this quick panic stuff and came out of his mouth. The disdain he has for Ruth because she ruins his chance to own more land now causes us to despise him. That scumball, that lowlife, is he a true Jew? All those sorts of things. He is worse than a Moabite, right? The text of Ruth helps us to become even more sympathetic for a Moabite, a Gentile, opening our hearts for the time when salvation will include the Gentiles. Ruth chapter 4 is all about preserving names, mentioning each person by name except a certain someone. Okay? We now know he is so despicable his name is not worth mentioning. Okay. So the way is open for Boaz to become the Redeemer. And he wants to. So it seems as if Desi and Joyce aren't here, but Joyce was saying, it sounds like he's bitten by the love bug, and this certainly seems to be the case. Let's continue. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. We will finish early today, but it is what it is. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging, to confirm a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. See, so now when the guy won't do his duty, right, when the widow comes up to him at the gate, and so she takes off his sandal and, that sort of thing. So we can kind of see this is almost like it could have like it could have negative connotations, but it could have positive connotations too. And it kind of serves like a handshake. Maybe years ago you would shake hands, and then that was supposed to, right? So in a sense, that's what this is doing. This is an act that's formally done to show a legal transaction is taking place. Okay, so it's not just what you say, but it's also what you do. One is confirming the other. Okay, what's that? I don't think so. Yeah, you're reneging on your agreement and your stinky sandal is still on the mantle. Do you want me to show it to you? Oh, no. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So, so that's what's taking place here. Okay, this is formalizing the agreement. It's making it legal, and there are witnesses. Okay, so, this guy will not be the Redeemer, and Boaz will. Okay, this is all done up front. Okay. So, and there's a little bit on the sandal thing on page 4 that I wrote a little bit about. Okay. And so let's look at verses 9 and 10, and then we'll stop because we want to be able to, have enough for next week. Okay, so verses 9 and 10. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon." So in other words, the property rights that would have passed on to the sons. He purchased that. Okay. "Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife." Bought, that just sounds so freaky, right? But that's all part of being a kinsman redeemer. He's fulfilling his responsibility. Okay. "To perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." What does this mean? We talked about this earlier. Any children that Ruth has will be considered children of Mahlon, which was her husband. Okay, so he's not passing. Nothing will pass on to his. This will be weird because the land that he inherited, how would that's going to end up being this huge weird thing later on, because he's not going to have any inheritors, because they're all going to be considered Mahlons. Okay, so that will be another story. Okay, yeah. So also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So legally, even though, let's say Ruth bears a son, she will, and the son grows up, he will be considered, even though Boaz will be the biological father, he will be considered the son of Mahlon legally and inherit everything that Mahlon would have passed on to him. Okay? So, yeah. Kind of convoluted to our thinking, but it right? It helps manage everything in a way, and helps keep somebody from hoarding and swindling property all to himself. Okay? We're going to stop here because we're going to figure out how everything else works out. But what's going to happen when Boaz purchases the property? Who's going to become wealthy? Naomi and Ruth. Yeah. So financially, this is not a good move. And that's the reason why this certain someone said, "Whoa!" And he balked and reneged on it. So Boaz is a good Jew. He's following the law like he should. He's doing his duty. And very good possibility he's bitten by the love bug. All right. That's it for today. We'll finish up the book of Ruth next week. And if you have any particular idea for, let's see, Sunday school or adult instruction or whatever, after that, come up with some ideas, okay? We pray. Heavenly Father, there is so much in this little book of Ruth. Now, of course, we need to understand a whole bunch of stuff to make sense of it, but we can see how Boaz actually does stuff that is to his financial harm, which benefits Naomi and Ruth. That's a picture of us, of Jesus, who does stuff which was to his harm, but to our benefit. So even such a little text as this points us toward our Messiah, so we can understand him all the more. In whose name we pray. Amen.